Well, a very good morning to everyone who's joined us live today for yet another episode of the Business Beyond the Curve that comes to you as part of the Resilient Lincolnshire series from the Lincoln International Business School at the University of Lincoln. So I'm Ruchi Agarwal. I'm Director of Business Development for the Business School, and it's my pleasure to welcome you today. And we've got people joining us live today via our Facebook feed, LinkedIn, and YouTube. So thank you so much for joining us on this morning. So it's just 10:30 on the 12th of June. And I'd like to give a little, few seconds on what Resilient Lincolnshire is all about. For those of you who've been following us, and thank you so much for the positive feedback we've been getting on this. This series was about creating and continuing a dialogue and a connect between the university and the industry and all the stakeholders who are facing the situation that we all are in together. And not to be able to lose what we are facing together and the ability to look at the future and what it may hold for all of us together, which is why we chose the name Business Beyond the Curve, which could mean the curve that we are looking at flattening and hopefully will normalize at some point of time, but also the curve of your businesses that you are in currently. But this platform of Resilient Lincolnshire brings the best of the university and the business in Lincolnshire together to talk about issues and have conversations that matter to all of us. So we decided to do it in two parts, and one of them is the Executive Education Series, which you can see every Wednesday rolling out from our academics speaking about impact issues for businesses, and you can follow that on the same social media channels that you've logged in from today. And this is the second part, which is called Business Beyond the Curve, in which we pick issues every week and sometimes multiple issues in a week to bring some voices of Lincolnshire that matter on those issues. And we're very, very pleased to have a wonderful panel here today yet again. And it surprises me of how much there is to talk about and how many angles we can talk about on issues that matter to industry. And we just go on week after week. And it's our pleasure to host this panel today. So I host it, but the person who does most of the work here is Dr. Craig Marsh, and I'll just get Craig up on screen with me. Craig, good morning.
Morning, Richie. I don't know about most of the work. I certainly have a good time.
No, thank you so much. Craig conducts the conversation with our panel that we handpick for the topic at hand. And today, Craig, we've got a very interesting word that I actually picked internationally and actually from India in one of my conversations, a portmanteau of words, as they call it, which is merging two words together. And we're theming it on Phygital. So physically digital, a mix of physical and digital, and a couple of other portmanteaus come to mind, shopaholic, something that we can't do right now, or a lovely brunch, something that we can't have outside. Just your view on a treatment like this. You were saying something before we started the call.
Indeed, and it was a word that I wasn't familiar with as well, but I think we get the point about the word phygital in the sense we're all now faced with this merging of the digital and the physical environments, and it's going to be really interesting to explore with our expert guests what that actually means for them and how they're planning to cope with the world once the two have merged.
Indeed. So let's take this portmanteau and let's look at the perspectives, and I'd love to introduce the panel in and hand them in your care, Craig. Cool. So first up, let me please bring a very familiar face to Lincolnshire. Peter, good morning.
Morning. Thanks for having me.
I don't know if you need any introduction at all to the audience we might be catering to. However, because Resilient Lincolnshire is now going beyond boundaries, it'll be wonderful to give a little introduction. So Peter is the managing director of Distract, a digital agency that is closely associated even with the university and a key voice for a lot of issues in Lincolnshire. So welcome on board, Peter.
Thank you.
Right. I'd also love to introduce Tim Tyler. Tim, good morning.
Morning.
So lovely to have you with us here on Resilient Lincolnshire, Tim. And just by sake of introduction, Tim is in business growth at Amy, again, who's a key partner. And we have been in touch for a while now, Tim. And it's our pleasure to host you on this panel.
Thank you very much.
So no panel is ever complete without a key voice from the university as well, and university being a large employer who's facing no different the issues from the industry is Drew. Drew, good morning.
Good morning.
And Drew, just by way of introduction to those who need it, is the Director ICT at the University of Lincoln. So a very key colleague to all of us in this digital world that we are living in. So Craig, that's your panel. So I'll see you on the other side of it.
That's great. Thank you very much, Rishi. Morning, gentlemen. It's great to have you all with us again. And so we've got a fascinating topic to explore this morning, and I know that all of you have got different areas of expertise and interest in there. So I'm looking forward to us having a chat about your particular take on the subject. And so I think what we can do with starting is just is go around the table, as it were, and start with perhaps just your initial perspective on, if you like, how you see the world now in terms of what your experience has been to this point. In trying to manage in a way which has suddenly brought digital to the fore, if it wasn't there already. So Peter Watson, why don't we start with you? And you were saying a little bit earlier about how your business has responded to this change, but you were already very much in the digital world, weren't you, before that?
Yeah, I kind of see this as the second digital revolution. I think that what's essentially happened with COVID-19 is it's brought a timeline that was going to probably happen over a 10-year period, smack bang in the face of businesses and employers. And I think it's been one of those moments where they've had to adapt to survive, and they've had to use tools that they normally wouldn't use. A really good example is this webinar right now, is that this simply would never have happened in a million years if it wasn't for COVID. And I think we're seeing employers adapt, businesses adapt. But really, the way I see this is this stuff was going to happen anyway. It's more efficient, it's more productive, and these changes were always going to happen. There's lots of worries I have. Like I said before this, like the first 6 weeks, this is the best thing since sliced bread. This is amazing. Now I'm seeing issues regarding mental health. Now I'm seeing issues of lack of productivity as people are confined to one space and not getting external noises. And I'm also seeing the small things that an office environment brought to the table, such as when you walk past someone to make a cup of tea, and those conversations that you're now missing. It's a big picture, and I think there's a lot to be discussed here.
Yeah, so that social element is really, really fascinating. And I know that you've got a very young business. I mean, I'm talking age-wise. I mean, I don't think you've reached the grand old age of 30 yet yourself, have you? So, so I think it's a really interesting perspective to see a generation that we always believe are, to use that cliche, digital natives. To hear that actually, very exciting in the initial phases, but maybe they're getting to the point now where they actually realize the limitations of complete digital working. Is that right? So you're almost at that point now where we've reached almost like a second phase of this particular crisis. Yeah,
I think that everyone absolutely loved the idea of a better work-life balance. I think people love the idea of being able to get up at 8:45 and rush through for your Zoom meeting. But the reality is that when you take away the thing that people are used to, which is social interaction, let's get real, like the whole of humanity, mankind, social interaction is what makes us human. And you rip that away from it, it has huge issues. Now, the problem we have is we're actually looking at this working from home from a completely different position than we would normally. Don't forget, we're in lockdown. We can't go and see people. They're the big issues. Whereas what would have happened if we did working from home, where you could still go and see your grandparents, you could still go and see your near neighbors and friends? It may have been a different outcome. But I think, as digital natives, the big thing that we have, is that we're used to technology. We can use this stuff fine. What we don't have in our agency is, people over the age of 50 who maybe weren't used to using some element of technology, and they've had to learn to kind of keep up. We've been fine to be able to utilize that stuff. And I think the issues we've really found as a challenge long term has been this impact on social pressures, not being able to speak to people, not being able to hug people, go out, eat food. But I think that could have been a result of lockdown rather than just working from home.
Working from home. So that's one particular area that I think we'll need to dig into. So brilliant. Thanks, Peter. I think there's quite a few things there that we can pick up and come back to during the course of the conversation. So Tim, Drew, talking about being over 50, I think that I suspect that applies to the other three of us. So Tim, you get to work with a lot of businesses in your role. And so what are you seeing? And I know you mentioned earlier, really tough to generalize on this subject, but perhaps just give us a picture from your perspective about what you've seen up to now in terms of happening with this idea of the merging of digital and physical.
Well, as you rightly said, there's a different age spectrum here from Peter, and I think I probably win on the age stake. So I started out my life in the military, and I'd have to disagree entirely with Peter. This is not new. The military have been working remotely using analog, voice only, but all the disciplines about mute and unmute have been around for a long time. What has happened, of course, recently is the quality of that and the availability has increased. So I don't think this is a new problem that we're facing or incapability that we're facing. thing. It's just an extension of things. But I will absolutely agree with Peter that there are places where the sort of face-to-face human interaction are critical. And again, in a military background, there were things that we could do remotely, but actually occasionally we had to come together because that's where you needed the creativity, the discussion, the sort of sidebar conversations that actually make things work. And I think in particular, that's where you get innovation ideas generated. It's very difficult to do that against the discipline of muting and unmuting and digital lag and so on. So I don't think this is a new problem. I think it's just extended more widely. And I think my experience over this, having started back in the analog radio days, but having been involved in some major change programs about working practice, is that it's very easy to oversimplify and overgeneralize, because actually the nature of individuals, the nature of businesses, the nature of the roles that people play actually have a significant impact on their personal needs and their communication needs and so on. And so really thinking through about the nature of the organization, the way you want to run it, but also what you do is very important in coming up with the best solution. Yeah. And of course, it's almost certainly not something that's going to stay static for long, not just because the sort of COVID situation will change, but actually the nature of work for individuals. In many cases, many people are not doing the job they even applied for when they turn up. And over the course of a few months, it can change. It can change significantly. So we just need to be very careful about thinking about how we are able to adapt and the flexibility of the systems that we put in place to support people.
Yeah, that's great, Tim. So you're seeing this from the perspective of a longer term development over the last about 2 or 3 decades, I guess, in terms of our sort of generation, if you like. But actually, we're not necessarily faced with new circumstances here, perhaps in a very different environment. But these things are part of a longer term trend. And of course, we were talking about the fourth industrial revolution, which has not been talked much about over the last 3 months. But those shifts are already occurring. And part of it is how we relate what we're doing right now to and recognizing that we were already in the midst of a transformation of working life. So I think that would be quite interesting to come back to and sort of think about whether that thinking has changed at all, in terms of where we were 3 months ago, thinking about the nature of the working relationship, how it's changed. I think that would be fascinating. I know you've got a particular interest in the sort of culture and the dynamics of that, and that might be something we can explore a bit later. Yeah. Okay. That's great. Thanks a lot, Tim. And Drew, I know you naturally object to my use of the word digital native, as you should.
I've got to pick you up on that one. I mean, I don't like the word digital in the first place, but I feel that I've been a digital native since the 80s and was an analog person as Tim was prior to that. I think it's very dangerous to sort of label groups by age and their ability to adapt to this sort of thing. I think this is a long-term situation, but as you've discussed there, it's not really changed from where we've been before. We're moving through changes in technology. I think probably where we are at the moment is we've had a cue, we've had a prompt to accelerate in certain areas, and the sort of change that we've been through in a matter of weeks, literally in a matter of weeks, that would typically, certainly at the university, would have taken years to implement, has been achieved so quickly. I think one of the things that we need to look towards the future is how can we prompt similar accelerations to learn from this experience, to try and drive that adoption of technologies that quite a lot of it, as Tim says, has been around for years. All of the stuff that we're using at the university has been in place for a good couple of years and being used there. We need to look at the way we're adapting and adopting to it. So what are the lessons that we can learn from the change that we've just been through, and I think, Tim, you talked about this, the next normal. How do we create that next normal and the next normal?
Yeah, that's great. Actually, Drew, and you mentioned this change that we went through. It was quite remarkable, wasn't it, at the university? And a lot of businesses experienced the the same thing. And I think we all sort of sat there and thinking, how is that, well, certainly now, how has that happened? How did we manage to shift so quickly? And actually, the point you're making about what we learn from that and about how quickly we can adapt, I think is really quite an interesting one to get into. And I'd be very interested in your perspective on that as to what it says about abilities people to adapt. I absolutely take your point also, though, that this isn't, and it's great, coming from our head of ICT, this is not about technology actually per se. This is about all of the other things that wrap around it. And I think we'll absolutely get that point. So Pete, we've had the challenge laid down to us. This is not about youth in that sort of way. But what I would be interested though is that I think there are some characteristics that I know I've explored in previous areas of a generation that have grown up with this intense familiarity with technology, and if any generation are used to the merging of technology and the physical, it has to be what we've referred to as Generation Z, right? And now I have my 18-year-old daughter is very much at home in Minecraft, and what they're doing in there is astonishing. I mean, something that I could never have imagined. And for me, that's a really interesting example of where you've got this sort of physical world translated into the virtual. I have no idea whether that's something that we can learn from, and whether that's something that would come into the workplace. I mean, what's your perspective on that question that we've had a bit of a challenge on?
I think I just want to touch on a point that was made by Tim and Drew, and it was that this stuff's been around for ages, and it absolutely has. The area that hadn't been around for ages, especially in kind of my sector, working with clients across the UK, was we were still very reliant. Let's say, for example, 2 years ago, if I had tried to arrange a meeting with one of my clients in London via Zoom, it wouldn't have happened. Like it would have been, oh, we could jump on the phone or come down and see us. It would never have happened. But I guarantee that even after COVID, after lockdown, 2 years time, 6 months time, whatever it may be, I guarantee that we're not making those trips to London now, and they'll all be on Zoom.
So
and I think that for me has been the biggest change. It's been the rather than, I'm going to use the term digital native because I know it annoys Drew, but the term digital native is forcing change. What's actually going to happen now is the rest of the working population will be embracing the change that's happened. Yeah. And I think that, from a managing director's perspective, when you go, it's going to take me 2 hours to get there. There's going to be, this and that, and you start working out the real cost of travel. I mean, even if you go for a meeting within the same town or same city, you've got half an hour there, half an hour back. You've got an hour meeting, which should only be half an hour, which is always the case. So you've essentially wasted an hour and a half for what is a half an hour Zoom call. And I think those sort of decisions, those sort of calls will be made right across the board now. And I think they're going to be much more effective now from a whole private and public sector. And it's going to be phenomenal to see.
So one of the things you're observing happening is that habits have changed, actually, that we will, and certainly we're probably about halfway through this kind of lockdown-ish period, and so we're looking at September as a university as being the place where we started. So what you're saying, what you're observing is actually some habits, deeply held sort of traditions, that the face-to-face meeting is everything, and anything else is a poor alternative. You will see that as a permanent change, and I know how client-focused you are, Peter. So you will not do anything that in some ways jeopardizes that client relationship. So you're seeing actually that these will provide a very effective alternative. I mean,
a real simple metric would be, if I would normally go and see a client in London once a month, I now can see that client twice a month, right? And maybe actually see them in person once every 6 months. So you can actually emphasize and improve your customer service, your client satisfaction because of technology, but still maintain that handshake that is required. I mean, I since lockdown, since it got relieved for working purposes, I've actually been within my outside my 2 meters with one client.
Yeah.
No, everyone, I had to go, we had to, talk things through a strategy with a whiteboard in front of everyone. But apart from that, we've not had to at all. And it really, our service hasn't changed. Our output nothing's changed because we are complete and utter digital in what we do. Now, there will be some industries that have been completely affected, of course, but when you aren't required, I've conversation with my dad and he'll say to me, he'll go, Pete, when are you bringing the team back? And I was like, I don't need to bring the team back. In fact, I probably could run this agency like this for the next decade and it wouldn't really be much of a problem. The problem, in my opinion, is the creative dynamic that being face-to-face brings. And you still have to have that level of contact. You still have to have the the bouncing of ideas, which just unfortunately doesn't happen as good through a Zoom call.
So what it seems to be doing, people, is that it's really focus as a businessman, it's focusing your attention on where the face-to-face or physical contact is absolutely necessary for the benefit of your business. So you've mentioned, and I want to come back to the social elements of it, and some of the potential well-being aspects of the lockdown. The client's expectation, so you can actually manage them better. You can probably manage them better with less physical work, and also this where creativity is key. That actually getting people in a room together is probably the way to do it, right? And creativity, of course, is crucial.
But the other huge point is when you take away the necessity of people having to drive around for meetings all day, is they're more available.
Yeah.
So trying to get 6, 7, 8 people to a 1-hour meeting in Lincoln would be a challenge, but getting 6, 7 people on a Zoom call for half an hour is easy.
Yeah.
And the thing that we've done, and we've done it with University of Lincoln and Rushi and our team, is that, let's increase our meetings to once a week. Why not? It's half an hour meeting, quick fire, any issues, queries, done. Whereas before you'd have to get 9 people together, match up diaries, get transport. Sorry, I've got a meeting in Chester in the morning, I can't make that meeting. Got all this. And from a profitable perspective, it's a no-brainer. From a client satisfaction perspective, it's a no-brainer. And I'm really, really going to be, and let me just say this straight. In October, November, I spent a fortune on a massive office. I kitted it out with, it was one of these ones that has basically slides in there. I've got grass, shrubbery. It's one of those offices. It's 2 stories high. I spent a fortune on the place, right? And I'm sitting here now thinking, crikey, what a waste of money. Genuinely, because I don't need it anymore. I don't need the massive conference rooms for the clients anymore. I don't need to have all these 3 meeting rooms. I don't need it anymore, because I really think that I've said to my business partner, let's turn them into conference calling rooms. Let's turn them into Zoom call rooms. You don't need to have 9 people.
A huge efficiency saving as well in terms of space, in terms of time, and obviously therefore cost on your business. And that's another positive consequence of that. Pete, thanks so much. And Tim, somebody who's picked up on your comment about the military. I was just observing it in the comments that we're getting in here. And you probably saw it, that flying drones over Afghanistan from Waddington is the ultimate work from home. I thought that was an interesting example of the case that you're making. That
incidentally, though I'm not an expert in that, exactly the same mental stresses on the pilots as there were flying over Afghanistan. In some ways worse.
Absolutely right.
Very interesting.
But more particularly, Tim, because we've also had a comment. So there we go. That the ultimate work from home. And I think one of the things that we picked up regularly, actually, from these seminars, is that colleagues with a military background or in the military, that it's really quite interesting how that's assisting them in dealing with some of these factors. And I think you just picked up a very good example of it. But Tim, also that Peter was really talking about the aspect of creativity, and I just find that a really interesting theme or dynamic that is clearly being challenged by us working remotely. We talked about a lot of the advantages of it in terms of efficiency of work, in terms of being able to make more regular contact. I mean, what you work with a lot of businesses. That on that particular theme, is that something that you see happening? What are you picking up from the businesses that you work with in terms of the advantages and disadvantages from that theme?
Well, I think I'm not sure I can answer the question directly, but just draw a little comparison with when we introduced fax machines. Do you remember? Everyone thought that was wonderful. All that happened then was everything worked to an even tighter.
Can we admit to that? Knowing that?
Well, I can certainly. And there are risks associated with this new environment. I mean, Peter's right. You can make many meetings, and everyone I've spoken to is wondering how on earth we're going to do half the things we wanted to do, because actually our diaries are so full of Zoom meetings. So there's never a zero-sum gain here, and we have got to learn how to be disciplined about using the Zoom meetings for what the video meetings for the right purposes. And Peter clearly got a good grip of that in his business. I'm not sure that that's necessarily generally the case, and I think the bigger the business, the more difficult that is to control. And I'm chairman of a charity that runs care homes, and that's an entirely different environment. But I would absolutely agree that this creativity we're social animals. That's how we think. That's how we think about the box. That's where we pick up simple things like the body language. When you say something that really strikes a chord for someone who's off camera, and you can stop and say, well, why did that respond? And in creative environments, that is so important. And maybe there will be a technology solution.
Absolutely. Apologies, a slight delay on your transmission there. It's been said, hasn't it? But I think we're all finding just how tiring it can be to be spending a lot of time on these sorts of calls. And I know that people have studied this and said, well, actually, it's things like the eye contact is somewhat different. You have to work harder in terms of picking up signals that you would naturally pick up in a meeting, and I'm sure people you would be doing this in a client meeting. So the work is harder on that social code. And somebody's actually just very interesting question. They said, well, online meetings work well for people who've met in advance, but perhaps tougher when making introductions and sort of building rapport. And Tim, while you're on, would you say that's true, that actually there's an element where you almost have to have some face-to-face contact just to develop that rapport and trust, and then it allows you almost to continue online? I mean, what's your perspective on that?
Well, I mean, we formed with Amy. We formed a new team on the 1st of April, brought new people in, and we're now towards the middle of June, and I have yet to meet these other people. And there is no doubt that had we all got together on the 1st of April for 24 hours, we would be have established that rapport, got ideas, understood each other's experience, and all that sort of thing. All the things that you don't necessarily put on the agenda of a meeting would have been much, much more effective than what we're doing now. And maybe that's because we're just not, we've adapted rapidly. When Peter's right, organisations have changed completely overnight, and that's been a major advantage in some areas. But we haven't got, the digital solution to the issues that we've just been describing.
No, and
maybe they'll come. Who knows?
Maybe they will. And actually, I know this is something that is of particular interest, and where Drew has a lot of expertise in. And Drew, we've been talking at the university, for example, about Lincoln in the cloud, and you know me. I've been working online for 10 years, so I'm very much in favour of these ideas that a lot of your Australian universities seem to be most advanced on. I mean, do you think this situation in terms of this idea of Phygital, do you think we're any closer to that, where we have a truly integrated working environment where there's almost, it just sort of merges the difference between let's say learning online or learning face to face? You can kind of swap naturally between the two. I mean, what's your perspective on that? Have we moved further to it, or are we still away from it?
I think we're a lot closer to it. I'm whilst Peter and Tim were talking, I was just remembering introducing video conferencing in the mid-2000s, where literally spent a fortune on the setup of the rooms. But the technology was fairly straightforward, a high quality camera and speaker, but spending a fortune to set up the room so it looked like you were, both ends of the conversation were in the same room, same furniture, same wall colorings, all that sort of stuff, really large screens. And now we're in an environment where we've all got our particular offices, bedrooms, whatever backgrounds in the background. We're all very comfortable with that sort of environment. It's becoming a lot easier. Looking at the teaching and learning environment, I think there's an awful lot already there. We've got some really good examples out there of where, whether it be changing from a traditional on-campus learning experience and moving it to purely online, whether it be moving to actually, right, let's forget about the traditional program of learning over 2, 3, 4 years and moving to the lifelong learning where you're dipping in and out, and it makes it a lot easier to dip in where material is available to you wherever you happen to be in the world. And it's available online, through to actually changing the way we're thinking about learning in terms of, do I need an MBA, do I need a degree? And I know you're going to hate me for saying this, but moving to things like micro-credentials and actually doing really, really short pieces of learning, which again can be online. But I think picking up some of the points earlier on, it still comes back to that craving for social interaction that I've spoken to my team, and they're all working perfectly fine off campus remotely. I mean, obviously there's with IT, there's a whole load of stuff that you have to do physically on campus. There's equipment that you need to maintain in the data center, etc. But whilst colleagues are working really well remotely, there's still that craving for social interaction, that they actually want to come in and meet people. I mean, the other interesting thing is that what we've seen is it's generated more interaction whilst people aren't physically together. So people can be sat in the same office and actually not really talk to each other that much.
Yeah.
What moving to this environment has forced them to do is I actually need to go and do something to talk to somebody. I can't just turn around. I never did it before, but I'm doing it now. And how do we maintain that sort of social interaction? And when we do start moving back into the next normal environment, it's going to be quite an interesting challenge. And I think people do crave that interaction, but my fear is that when actually people do go back face to face, you'll get less interaction. I think we need to take advantage of this.
That's really interesting. So the point on, you made the point about learning. I mean, I think it is one of the things that I've been hugely keen on, is that we are slightly more client focused, I have to say, in terms of some of the ways that we deliver our learning. So, and I think this will focus our attention on that, particularly things like the micro-credentialing, which actually happens is something that Rushi has got some very interesting ideas on. So I think we're looking forward to taking the opportunity perhaps to break, as you've pointed out a couple of times yourself, Drew, that, places like universities are full of long-held traditions, which this is challenging. And I think we'll benefit from that, and actually have people saying, we don't have to do things that way after all. And that is absolutely, I think, going to be one of the consequences of this shift, I think. So Peter, Drew has picked up on the issue of the social interaction, and I do want to come back to you on that one, because I just find it fascinating that of any company that you would feel that there would be natural and relaxed in working remotely, it would be yours. But perhaps for the wrong reasons, because you're saying now that you are starting to see signs of, I think you said 85% of people are worried by some of the impact on mental health. So I'd just be fascinated to hear perhaps a bit more from you about that. And as a business leader, what sorts of things you're thinking about to do about that now, and what that might change for the future.
So you've got to remember, actually, that most of our staff are in a different period of their life than say, your organization and other organizations. A lot of our staff are sub 27, maybe live by themselves, or maybe have a partner that they live with, or maybe have a partner they don't live with. And because of that, there's a bit more isolation. I'm going to take some general some things. Maybe someone in your organization maybe has a family, has some kids, etc. They've got a bigger home environment, whereas a lot of my team are living by themselves. Yeah. And therefore the lockdown has a debatably bigger impact on them, because they literally have no real world social interaction. So that's where I believe that my team's mental health has played a part in it, because they are in lockdown to the extreme, because they just see no one. Now, if you've got some kids or you've got a wife or whatever, that's a little bit easier, I would say, because at least you've got someone to talk to. So I think that's been the extreme play on my generation. It's been that most people live by themselves or whatever. The other thing that I've noticed is that we've got a few other businesses, and we hired an MD for this business. He came from London, moved to Lincoln, and lockdown happened the week before he started. I've never met this guy. Well, I've met him, for the interview stage, obviously, but I've not met him since he's joined. And that has been one of the weirdest things of all time. Like, how are you getting on?
Yeah.
Like, he can say fine, but you're right. Tim and Drew are right. When someone says they're fine and they're not fine, you can see it in their posture. You can see it in their body language. You can see it in their. I mean, I don't know this stat. You'll know it, Craig, better than me, about how most conversations done through kind of not through voice but through everything else.
What's not said. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that we've been missing here. And the big question, the real opinion I have here is, working from home works. It's proven. It's done. Everyone knows it works. However, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, as soon as I can, and I'm going to make it optional, I think, to a lot of teams short term. You can come in if you want, etc. I want to get people back together.
Yeah.
I want to bring back the camaraderie. I want to bring back the team spirit. I've got table tennis tables in the office. I want to bring back the closeness. I think we've lost that. Some of our guys play Call of Duty and they have Call of Duty squads and they all communicate through the games they play, but it's just not the same. It's just not the same. And so I want to get back everyone as soon as we can, get them all back in a room. I don't think I'm going to sit by this working from home thing. I just don't think it's good for the long-term effect of a business. However, I do believe the things we've learned from working from home, we can bring into the normal everyday life. For example, things like this, Zoom calls with clients. We a big revenue driver for our business is speaking events. And I myself and my team speak across the whole of the UK, and it brings us in leads, and we obviously sell the leads. We sell them to the clients, etc. All events have stopped, right? So, oh no, our leads will stop. But what the team have done is they've created online conferences, online events, which have been phenomenally well, which are working amazingly well. So we're finding new things during the chaos that we never would have looked at previously.
Yeah.
Our events bill was 80 grand last year to sponsor events. And now we're creating our own events. We've got 3 this week. It's cost us £1,000 each. So we're finding the wins in the chaos, and I think that every business needs to look at their organization now and go, okay, right, we've been forced to be remote. Let's find what worked for us, and let's find what didn't work for us. And I think that is the big thing that every leader has to do. And for me, I love the team, but they're better together. I'm going to rip them out of the working from home environment, but I'm going to keep the technology there to make it more efficient.
Absolutely right. And one of the things I've heard quite regularly, so I think it's just brilliant. There's an opportunity to work on your business as well as just in your business, and you're clearly doing that. It almost seems to me, through these many conversations that we've been having on the theme of resilience, that when it comes down, I know Tim has referred to this as well. The individual and businesses, it almost seems like a black and white thing. You can sit there, rabbit in headlights, and kind of let this sort of wash over you and hope that everything will go back to normal. Or you can actually start to work on what your business is up to, what its model is, how you capture value, how you create value, which is obviously the hard thing.
Craig, the thing that I've been saying to a lot of our management team and to my business partner was we have 2 options in every piece of chaos. We can either roll over and say that's enough, or we can attack this thing. Yeah. And we just attacked it. We increased our advertising spend. We increased our investment in technology. We just went all out, and we've seen upside. And there will be brands out there that had to roll over. One of my friends owns Brown's Pie Shop, which is a really cool restaurant in Lincoln, and restaurant was shut. And I use this example for everyone because this is the perfect example. His restaurant was shut. Now, for 2 years, I told him to do delivery. I told him to do Deliveroo, Uber Eats. People are busy enough. I don't need it. Well, guess what? This forced him to do delivery, right? This shoved him in a corner and said, you've got 2 options here. You either shut and take your furlough pay and your government bailout, or you get grafting. Yeah. He rolled his sleeves up. He did delivery only, and he made more revenue from delivery than if he was open normally.
Yeah.
And now he's opening another takeaway only business.
Brilliant.
You've got 2 options in your case, either win or lose, and you can decide what you want to do.
And I would say, praise be, our local pub has done exactly the same thing. They're going to shut down. They furloughed quite a few of their staff because what they've done is they've started click and collect, and they're actually doing more covers through click and collect than they did when they had people. For all the reasons that you've mentioned, actually, in your own business, about it being much more efficient.
He said to me, he furloughed his staff straight away to protect the business, of course. And then he brought them all back and said, look, we've done this new thing. Your jobs are now safe. Come on home.
Fantastic. I just love hearing those stories from your business, and I'm not at all surprised on that. And actually, Tim, you've been talking about how important the culture of the business is, and you've got yourself head of a charity there. And perhaps we've heard an example of that, right? I mean, could you say a little more about how you see that aspect as being important in this conversation about the physical versus the digital? And we've had a great case of it. And what's your perspective on it, Tim?
Well, I think questions about culture are very different. The culture organisation seems to be a combination of its procedures, its leadership, the nature of people who are attracted to it. Yeah. And I think probably the simplest ducking was an almost impossible question is to say that every organisation's got to look at what it's trying to do, its weaknesses, and be prepared to try things out them differently, get different opinions, because there isn't, as I think the point I made, that there isn't going to be a one size fits all for the organisation. But just sort of referring to the leadership, I mean, it is very important that people understand what the leadership regards as the right sorts of behaviours. And Peter's obviously making it very clear to his people. I think it's more difficult in a bigger organisation. And so getting the leadership style flowing through the organisation is critical. And organisations where everyone understands the big ideas rather than what the rules are, the ones that are more likely to succeed, because people will be prepared to adapt their environments and their methods to suit that. So this is not going to be driven by clear policies and rules. It's going to be driven much more by understanding and engaging people on the mission. I mean, it's interesting, just picking up some points that Peter's making, 3 examples of businesses that I've talked to. So one of our clients was talking to me the other day about the need to make 10% saving. The previous view was we need to make 10% savings over the next X years in efficiency. He talked to me the other day. He said, actually, 10% is crazy. We can do 25% easily as a result of this, because we've now did things. Another business I talked to, they surveyed their staff about whether they were looking forward to coming back to home working or into the office, and it was very interesting. All the people who had nice homes with plenty of room in the suburbs, who didn't like commuting, said they want to stay working. All the people, particularly of Peter's generation, who were living in London in small flats, who needed the company, all wanted to come back. So there was a really interesting example. That was their response was not business focused at all. It was entirely sort of focused on the people. And talking to another sort of big IT provider, they've done a survey of people who their office support, and they reckon that actually the capacity they need is probably only 40% of what it used to be. But it'll all be different office spaces. It will all be about sorts of things that Peter has eloquently put forward about engaging. And whether they will have table tennis tables or not, I don't know, but that seems to be a good idea, because you can then sit around it and have a meeting. So definitely change coming. Trying to predict what that will be, setting a set of rules out for a particular industry or a particular organisation, I think will be just as difficult as ever it was about trying to generalise in this space.
That, very much so, Tim, and I think very interesting insights on that lack of ability to generalise some of the cultural and leadership aspects of this challenge. And at the university, we've been doing one of the models that we know of in strategy is scenario planning, right? So you've no clue what we're going to have in terms of numbers of students even in October. So it's like, okay, so here are like 4 different ways that could play out. And how can we be responsive in each of those? That's the sort of how, really coming down to, as a business, concentrating on how you create value, and then on how you retain that value. And that's the heart of any business, isn't it? And being able to sort of step back and reflect on it and be flexible around it, whether you're a local restaurant, as Pete's described, whether you're Pete's business, whether you're a university or even a multinational, actually. Sometimes it comes down to an individual. You're losing a job. What skills have I got? Where can I readapt those skills to apply it to a different set of circumstances? So that kind of culture and sort of attitude seems to be absolutely crucial for managing this. We've had another couple of interesting points in the thread here, and I'm going to pick up on a question actually, Joe, and I do think this might be an interesting one that you may be able to reflect on. So we've had Mike has said, would remote working hubs reduce the problem of isolation and lack of real world interaction? So I think it's the idea where you've got sort of a hub model of organising. Is that something that in your area or expertise might work? Drew?
I certainly think it's one of the. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you fine. No.
Yeah, sorry. I think it is one of the. Sorry, I missed that.
Just a bit broken, Drew. Carry on.
Can you? Oh, right. Okay. I think it is one of the things that we can definitely consider. The question of space in businesses and organisations, which could lead on to the potential for this. I mean, if you look at the university, we've got a tremendous amount of space, and it's been built up over the years based on, as you described, student numbers and a model of working which is traditionally the sort of normal business working day. It has been over the last number of years been stretched, so we've created a longer teaching day, but you're still talking about a massive amount of space that effectively is available 24/7. How could we make better use of that? And this idea of collaborating with other organisations, both within the sector and outside of the sector, to make better use of those sorts of tools. And one possibility could absolutely be creating working hubs for people from any organisation, if the technology is available there to plug into the internet and get onto whether it be Zoom or Teams or whatever they're using for their collaboration. Absolutely. I think the creation of space, it varies. I mean, if you talk to institutions in London, they will tell you that they haven't got enough space. I think they're probably speaking to them in a at this point in time, they'll have a different story to tell. But we have got an opportunity here to take advantage of space and repurpose it and use it for different matters. I mean, could the university make the space that we've got that we're not using out of teaching hours available for other organisations and businesses to use?
Yeah. Brilliant. Thanks, Drew. And Tim, I think you've got a perspective also on this question, have you, on the government initiative, Tim?
Well, it's interesting. The central government, government more widely has been trying to introduce what they call the government hubs proposition, which the idea was that any civil servant or person employed on government contract could go into any office or any of these hubs around the country to do their work. And as I understand it, although I'm not an expert on it, local authorities have not been very enthusiastic about it, but there's some progress being made and space being made available for people within central government. And I think this could just take off. But the point I would make is that was pan government, and why would any business want to create its own hubs? So long as, so there has to be a business for someone in generating them, and I'm sure they will play a part. To some extent, we've sort of been doing it in the analog world, haven't we? We've been meeting at Costa and other places. Well, we all know that sort of works. Actually, there's we could make it work much better, I think. So I think the hubs concept is definitely something that we'll see develop.
Absolutely, and Tim, you make a very good point. And actually, when you travel to other parts of the world, and in the days when I could travel to India, this is. You see this all the time. You walk into the local cafe, and you have the people actually running their businesses from that cafe. They're very much into that, and I'm sure people you'll have experienced that as well, where you basically work where your laptop is, and that gives you reduces your cost, increases your efficiency, turns it into a networking opportunity. So there's certainly something in the model, provided that social element is in there, isn't it? And one of the conclusions I think we've all made is that we've learned a lot from the lockdown. We've learned a lot about the advantages of technology, but we've also learned the limits of it. And that actually building in some of the things we've learned about the use of technology with the ability to create places where people can come together still to benefit them socially, but also to benefit your business, as Pete says, in terms of creativity, seems to be what we'll need to get to. Thanks. I'm just having a quick look. Interesting, we've had somebody say, it'd be great to still see so many online discussions such as these. We shall absolutely continue them as we go forward. I think partly perhaps for my own interest, as we're getting close to our time here, we've touched a couple of times on the subject of leadership here and culture. And I think we've got a fantastic example, certainly from the three of you, in terms of leading through this kind of this pandemic and what effects it's happening. And certainly from my perspective, one of the fundamentals of leadership has always been about trust. And I do feel that often we've put people in offices because as leaders, we've not really been able to trust them. We want to be able to see them there and what they're doing. And actually, you can't do that online. And I think it's really shown just how important it is to be able to trust people through leadership. That would be one of my conclusions of their experience. But Pete, you're in this position. And any final thoughts on I know you as a leader. What how has it challenged you? Are you leading the same way? Are you doing anything different now? How's it working with you? Need you on off mute, Pete.
It's completely different. One of the challenges we have normally is if anything difficult happens, I can be a bit of a rah-rah guy. I can stand in front of a room, try and inspire everyone, try and get them back on the same wavelength. Very difficult to do that to a team that is completely remote-led. It has opened up all sorts of questions, though. I mean, in terms of hubs, and there's WeWork spaces in the similar all across the world, really, is that we now have the opportunity to hire people from anywhere in the world. We had this opportunity before, but now we are more adapted for that to actually take place. But the issue it has, in my opinion, is I think that learning could be an issue. I think the great thing with, let's say, an advertising agency is that you'll be put next to someone who's been doing it for years. You'll pick up some of the skill sets. They'll guide you through it. Very hard to do guiding learning, for example, through Slack or through Zoom or screen sharing. It can be done, but the productivity and the progress is much faster when you're literally just sat next to someone. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of it. I'm going to pull everyone back, but I think there's been so many lessons we've learned along the way, which we're definitely going to keep doing. And here's the thing. A lot of my friends in business have said, actually, I think we're running a bit high on staff. I think we've got some of my friends have been like saying, actually, the productivity measures we've done now, we've actually maybe had too many staff for the last 5 years.
Yeah.
I think it's open for a lot of questions around productivity, if I'm being really honest, and how things can be done much faster, much more productive, saving time for meetings, driving, you name it. I think from a leader's perspective, and especially from managing director perspective, it's allowing you to look at your business in a whole new way, which isn't a bad thing.
No, it's not
bad at all.
And that productivity thing, this country has been challenged with its productivity numbers for years, and that once we got through the massive economic effect of the crisis, that might well be one of the things that we see. Actually, a fundamental restructuring that allows us to be more productive as a country. Actually, I would think. And so I think that's a really interesting insight in terms of our idea of the combination of the physical and digital. So thank you, Pete, Tim. And we've had a couple of people coming in about Mike, in terms of the hubs, what office space available to any office worker rather than from a single entity. Absolutely. But I know you're as a leader yourself and as an experienced businessman and as a consultant in this area, and what is there any pushing you a tad on generalization? Is there anything that you can say that we can draw in terms of lessons for how businesses are led and managed as a result of this crisis?
So I'm absolutely not in a leadership role with Amy at the moment, but I do remotely, as chairman of a charity, have a leadership responsibility. It's very interesting watching how things have developed in the charity, because I'm picking up a couple of Peter's points on trust. There are some people who we have trusted for a long time who all of a sudden we realize we can't. And there are some people who we haven't recognized their skills, who have just been unbelievably adaptable, where their job hasn't, has sort of gone, could have been furloughed, but actually something else completely outside what we might have expected them to do. I think we have developed a different sort of relationship. There are clearly some people, I slightly misrepresent the people who we have trusted in the past. We can't. Actually, that's because the way in which they like to work is part of the team, being told what to do, getting on with it, having instant feedback, and they've found it just very difficult. So it's true we can't trust them to the same extent, but that just reinforces the point that we're all individuals. We all have individual businesses to run, and we have to be really careful to make the most of the environment that we're operating in. And going back to this people thing again, even before COVID, what did we do? We took time out, didn't we, to do team building exercises, completely away from the business. So there somehow we have to find a way of doing that within a team. And I take Peter's point about, yes, you can employ people all over the world, but will they ever be part of the team? They can be potentially come in for a project, say that maybe we need to adjust the way we see core business and project business, and get better at defining the project business, so you can get someone in who you never need to meet but can produce a product. So I think those lessons, and of course, did we know that before? Yes, we did. Did we have to be decisive about it when we were all working in the more conventional environments? No, we didn't, but now perhaps we do.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tim. And I think also, and picking up on a point referred to earlier, it'll also challenge us to make sure that we're still being moving towards being inclusive in the way that we lead as well, because it prevents a different challenge of inclusivity. In fact, technology actually allows some people to work where they wouldn't perhaps be physically challenged to if they were in an office. And then, of course, the opposite is true, that some people have particular reasons why they find technology very difficult to use. So I think that's one area, for me, one challenge of leadership, which we all need to be thoughtful of, actually, as to how we're not creating sort of in and out groups any more than we used to be. And I'm sure we all have to be very thoughtful about that, I think. And Holly's just put in and reflected, about, which we've all concluded, about team building, keeping colleagues connected, is going to be a huge factor on that. So absolutely right, Holly, and I think that's one of our conclusions on that. Drew, if I may finish with you, I perhaps just a minute on, from your perspective, what's your vision from a university point of view? If you and I had this sort of magic wand that we never get access to, what the university is likely to look like if we had unlimited resources to do something completely different. I mean, what's your view on that? What could we do?
I don't think it's physically going to look too much different to the way it does at the moment. I think we've got opportunities to look at different ways of teaching and learning. But I'm picking up Peter's point earlier on, the willingness, the attitudes of students within the learning environment. We've been talking about how we manage in the next academic year and what that environment's going to be looking like. And students across the country are talking about, we don't feel we're getting value if we don't have that traditional on-campus experience. I think it's more than just the teaching and learning environment. We can provide all of the technology to allow any combination of on-campus, blended, totally remote learning. I think we need to very carefully consider what the students want from this experience, and we need to make sure that it is rather than simply just looking at, we can do this. It's, should we do this? Should we get everything into the blended environment? Should we move more back towards? But it's asking that question of what is the university of the future going to look like? I still think we will have university campuses. I think, rather than specifically Lincoln, I think the FE and the HE sector will change, and I think it will be a different landscape in terms of just how many institutions we have and the level of, it's a very collaborative environment, but the level of cooperation between universities and the ability, taking that idea of remote working hubs, having remote learning hubs shared across institutions, and having students being able to go into a physical campus that isn't necessarily their home campus. That is perfectly feasible. We could do that now if we wanted to. We've just got to get that conversation going. So I think there'll be ideas like that will come out. The technology, it will continue to improve, and the experience of this will get better and better. And when government and BT and Virgin and whoever else that I have mentioned improve the communications network, we'll have less of the jittery conversations and stuff, and it will be a far better experience.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Drew. It's great to sort of paint that picture of what may be possible. Gentlemen, we are up against our time. I do apologise. A fascinating discussion. Thank you so much for your insights into a subject that clearly is of interest to everybody right now. And I think I'm sure I've learned a lot actually just from hearing how you've described your own experiences. So Peter, Tim, Drew, thank you so much for your contribution, for your time. And I shall now hand back to our host, Rushi, to finish off the broadcast. Rushi?
Thank you so much, Craig. Wow, what a conversation. And Peter, Drew, and Tim, thanks so much. And, when I picked this portmanteau Phygital, I didn't know what to expect, but I really think the depth of what we've had has been unbelievable. So when I hold up my hand, just see how many of these portmanteaus we use. So, the Wi-Fi did give us a little bit of trouble, but thankfully it went okay on this webinar called Business Beyond the Curve, and as part of the Resilient Lincolnshire series. But the ginormous impact of what we discussed today is, of course, all pervasive. So that's so many of these, merged words that we used. Wonderful, way of discussing what is in our lives completely. So thank you so much again, and thanks for the listeners who've been tuned in and the ones who will listen, of course, post this live series. So Resilient Lincolnshire as a concept continues right through the summer and hopefully rest of this calendar year at least. And thanks to our partnership also with the Center for Resilience that we bring this to you every week. So just on one last note, I'd like to bring a little bit of attention to the fact that we do have coming up next week, actually on Thursday, an MBA leadership information session, which is an invitation for anybody actually to come in, log in on the 18th of June at 10 a.m. right here, and to be able to get some more information on the MBA, which is a blended form of MBA. Again, a Phygital, form of what we teach right now, which fits right onto what we're talking now. So as a closing note, Craig, thank you so much for hosting this today and for conducting such an interesting conversation. Thank you, Peter, Drew, and Tim for being our guests today. And thank you everyone for listening in. So on that note, stay safe and we'll see you again.